Hello, I'm Mr. Eliason, and welcome to World History. Today we're going to continue our survey of the world after World War I by looking at the effect of this on the main loser of the conflict, Germany. So today we're going to look at the problems in the creation of the Weimar Republic and some of the issues that the Weimar Republic faced and how this is going to shape the world for many years to come, creating, movements like the National Socialist movement and pretty significant unrest and resentment within Germany. So here's our objectives for today. We'll take a moment and take those in, and let's move forward. The German Revolution is the overthrow of the German government in the aftermath of World War I and the push to reform German society and some real disagreements amongst various German reformers about what this new society would look like. As you hopefully remember from our study of World War One, when Germany surrendered and lost the war, it wasn't as if the triumphant Allies marched into Berlin. It was more the German army stopped fighting, the Kaiser abdicated. There was this plan for the Germans to go down fighting, basically to take their navy and launch a suicide attack against the Allied forces. And the soldiers just basically said that we're not going to do it. They mutinied. They refused to go out and die for the Kaiser. And this was one of the last things that convinced the Kaiser that he had to abdicate and he had no place in German government anymore. And so the Kaiser abdicated and Wilhelm II gave up, and power in Germany passed into a civilian government. The goal was to create sort of a multi-party democracy, and the guy who created this was Friedrich Ebert, who was head of the Social Labor Party of Germany, the SPD, which is going to be one of our major political parties going forward. He was a socialist reformer, but not a radical communist, and so he's going to try to create this new, somewhat socialist or left-leaning Germany in the aftermath of the Kaiser's abdication. Unfortunately, the early phases of demobilization for Germany did not go well. The German Navy had not been paid particularly well or on time, and so when the sailors were told that they were going to go home without getting their pay, they instead revolted. They seized control of a number of German cities and basically demanded that they would get paid before they went home. And so the Volks Marine Division revolt really set the stage for the early Weimar Republic, with sailors seizing control of government buildings, marching in and shutting down government functions, and basically refusing to leave until they got paid. And so the German government immediately is faced with this crisis. In the end, the only way the German government got the sailors to go home was to agree to pay them and to keep a significant portion of them mobilized. And so, even in the early years of the Weimar Republic, they had to bend to popular forces, and this is going to put a pretty substantial financial damper on the new republic, which is already going to struggle to pay its bills. Now they need to keep a significant portion of the people's naval units here mobilized and make sure that they're still getting paid. And so, they're going to have to find a way to come up with that money, which is going to mean taxes or debt or just print money. And they go for all of these with pretty substantial consequences. So the Volksmarine Division revolt is step one of this. In order to keep these people mobilized, they eventually created this group called the Free Corps, which is a sort of a paramilitary group that somewhat supports the current government. It's made up mostly of former German soldiers and sailors, and they kind of become the shock troops of this new government in order to help restore order, help put down unrest, and they become sort of this informal military police force that the government can use in order to make sure that they stay in power. The immediate challenge to this is the Spartacus Uprising. This is part of a larger sort of communist plan in order to overthrow governments in Europe. One of the big hopes for the communists is that the German government would be overthrown and the massive industrial might of Germany would be seized by socialists and added to the global socialist revolution. The revolutionaries in Russia were really hoping that the German workers would rise up and join them. And the revolution in Russia was really predicated on the fact that, without some sort of larger support from the rest of Europe, Russian communists are going to really struggle to stay in power, which we're definitely going to see later when we talk about the formation of the Soviet Union. And so the Spartacist Uprising was one of these pieces of global communism rising up, seizing control of the industrial West, and then ushering this new supposed supposed workers' paradise, where the means of production would be in the hands of the workers. But the end result of this, unfortunately, is the Communist Party is going to fail. Here's the account of the Spartacus Uprising. So pause and read. Here's Rosa Luxemburg's speech here to try to mobilize the Spartacists. And the Free Corps are going to put this whole thing down, and Luxemburg is going to be executed as part of this, and there's going to be substantial backlash against German communists. I wouldn't say it amounts to a white terror like we had in a lot of other places, but we are going to see the crushing of communist activity, the forcing underground of German communist groups, basically guaranteeing that the socialist uprising would not come to Germany, that the Russians would not get their ally in the West, and that they more or less have to go it alone, which is going to, of course, change the course of the Soviet Union, which again we'll talk to when we get to the formation of the Soviet Union. In the end, the German government that was adopted is known as the Weimar Republic. It's a multi-party parliamentary democracy that elects a government elects a legislature called the Reichstag. The Reichstag then appoints a chancellor, but there's also a popularly elected president. Power is shared between all of these different groups of people. And in the end, German people, we get universal suffrage. All adults, including women, can vote and have equal rights. And so on paper, this seems like a relatively stable, liberal governmental system with checks and balances that will be able to govern effectively. The problem is that there was no specific group that had enough power to be able to rule on their own. And so although the SPD, the Social Democrats, the German Workers' Party, is able to get a majority, get more seats than anyone else, they're always going to have to rule in conjunction with either the Marxists, the centralist reformers, some of the individual nationalist political parties, or some of the liberals. And honestly, there's not a general consensus, and so these coalitions are going to be constantly forming and reforming, and it's really going to hurt the German government because they're not going to be able to come up with a consistent plan to push reform. And so because of that, the Weimar Republic is going to struggle to pass laws in order to stabilize Germany, and they're going to sort of veer from policy to policy depending on who is in/out of the coalition. As far as art and culture goes, the Weimar Republic is a masterpiece of German expressionism. The Germans had a lot of things to process after World War I, and so German art and theater specifically processes a lot of these things. The famous movie Metropolis is sort of about oppression of the workers, growth of technology, stuff like that. There's some interesting pieces there. Nosferatu is one of the more famous sort of German expressionist films during this time period. And so all of these created a golden age for German culture, despite the fact that the Weimar Republic politically, economically, socially was not a great time for most German people. The Weimar Republic created a vast sense of war regret, or the loss in World War I created a vast sense of war regret amongst the German people. The unemployment and economic sort of displacement created by the First World War, coupled with the horrible conditions that the soldiers had faced, really led a lot of people to question why they fought the war in the first place, what the war was about, whether defending Austria-Hungary was worth it, whether fighting for the Kaiser was worth it. And so we really saw a sense of disenchantment in the German people. And for a lot of hardcore German nationalists, they started to really embrace some of these negative feelings. And so here's Otto Dix explaining how horrible the war was for him and how hard it was for him to move past it. And we get this whole stabbed in the back theory from a lot of World War I veterans, most famously Adolf Hitler. The stabbed in the back theory is the idea that the German people would have won the war if they hadn't been betrayed by a combination of cowardly politicians, communists, and Jewish people. And this myth that the German people would have been able to win the war without this is probably, frankly, untrue. Germany, regardless of any of this, had they fought on, would have been destroyed. But at the same time, people like the General Erich Ludendorff start to embrace this stabbed-in-the-back philosophy in order to account for their loss. And the harshness of the Versailles Treaty against Germany makes a lot of them wish that they had fought on, despite the fact that it would have been almost certain defeat, dismemberment, and destruction for Germany. And so you have this sense of unfairness that's behind Hitler's attempted takeover. Hitler forms this nationalist, so the National Socialist or Nazi Party, and he is going to attempt to seize control of city governments in Munich in conjunction with guys like Ludendorff here. They're going to seize control. Again, they're going to meet in this beer hall, and then they're going to seize control of this region, try to seize control of the region of Bavaria, and try to create a new government with their sort of paramilitary forces that they've gathered. In the end, they absolutely fail. The German people do not rise up with them. They march off to try to seize control of the city hall in Munich and are defeated by police officers. Hitler is arrested, put on trial, but as you can see here, he uses this as a platform to sort of spread his ideas. And in the end, sympathetic judges, feeling bad for this World War I vet who wants to restore glory to Germany, give him an extremely light sentence. And the trial actually does more to raise his social stature because it gives him a public platform to sort of spread his ideas, because newspapers are, of course, covering this. So Hitler's going to jail, but he's going to have time to sort of refine his ideas and prepare for his eventual takeover of Germany. One of the things that really crushed the German people economically were reparations. The reparations, or the massive war indemnity payments that Germany would have to make to the Allies, were considered reasonable by the Allies because they were simply the indemnity payments from the Franco-Prussian War adjusted for inflation. But for the already exhausted Germany, they proved to be a absolutely backbreaking weight that the German people could not afford to pay. And so as a result, the Weimar Republic printed money both to pay their soldiers and also to pay these reparations, leading to a massive hyperinflation crisis in the early 1920s. Money became basically useless. People would have to go shopping with wheelbarrows full of cash and would allow children to build towers with cash because it had absolutely no value. And prices were rising to a rate that was totally unsustainable. Here's a German woman going shopping, so take a moment to read, and then we'll move on. And all of this led Hitler to argue that Germany needed to change, that they needed their own supply of resources. He laid out his whole philosophy in his book Mein Kampf. And when he got out of jail 6 months later, he continued planning, working with Ludendorff and other hardline German nationalists to help build support and plot for the eventual overthrow of the Weimar Republic. In the end, the hyperinflation crisis of 23-24 ended up ending with the Dawes Plan. The United States, who was going through the economic boom of the Roaring '20s, agreed to loan money to Germany to prop up the German economy. These loans helped stabilize the German mark and allowed the Germans to make their payments to the Allies and also to fund their government. Then the Allies could make war debt payments to the United States. And as long as the economy of the United States maintained stable, the global economy would be stable as well. And so the Dawes Plan propped up this whole system, predicated on the continued economic success of the United States. All nations also adopted the KelloggBriand Pact and had a series of naval conferences in order to try to eliminate war as a tool of foreign policy and limit their armaments. We'll talk more about this when we get to the Roaring '20s, but this shows, sort of the regret that the entire world had over World War I, and that most of them were committed to try to prevent future conflicts, even though there's some pretty significant sort of undercurrents working within a lot of these societies to oppose these plans. So that brings us to a close today. So that's what happened to Germany in the aftermath of World War I. And so we're going to continue our survey next time and keep looking at the way that the Middle East and other areas evolved. But for now, we'll leave us there. So thank you for listening.